lesson. Today it's not super hard, but just make sure you try to pay attention to the little details so you understand what you're doing, so that when you get to the test, you're not like, I don't remember if I'm doing this or that. You know what I mean? So that's always the hardest part for students, I think, is to say, well, I remember how to do everything, but I don't remember what to do or where to start. So that's the first thing you've got to be able to do on a test, is say, what am I supposed to be doing here? So remember that a quadratic has the standard form ax squared plus bx plus c. A couple things to remember, it's quadratic because the highest degree is 2, correct? Standard form is highest degree to lowest degree. Is everybody good with that? Quadratic, okay? So then when we factor a quadratic, what we can do is, if we factor a quadratic, then we use, sometimes if it asks to solve, it's easy to solve them, because if you factor it, then you can find the zeros by setting your factors equal to 0 and then solving. So we know by looking at this one, x squared minus 4x plus 3, if we were to solve this, then we're going to get 1 and 3. Because isn't it when we solve a quadratic, we are finding where it's crossing the x-axis? You know, so we could solve this one by graphing, but if I said to you solve by factoring, then we would want to do that. And then we can always check our answers in our graphing calculator and see if we got them right. So let's factor this one. I'm going to write it bigger. I've already kind of shown the steps for you on your paper, so just watch up here. So the first thing we do is put it in standard form, set it equal to 0, and it is. So then remember, my a value is in front of x squared, a is 1. My b value is negative 4. See, look, a, x squared, so a is 1. B is negative 4, bx, and then c is 3. Any questions on that part? So then we do, when we're factoring, what multiplies to be a times c, and adds up to be b. So we're doing what multiplies to be 1 times 3 and adds up to be b, which is negative 4. So the factors of 3 are 1 times 3, correct? The only factors. We need it to add up to be negative 4, so they both be negative. Now you got to check. Is negative 1 times negative 3 positive 3? Yes. And then negative 1 plus negative 3 is negative 4. So then we drop and break. So remember, from here, we would drop down our end terms. So you can see it better on your paper, because I'm going to have to go off to the side and write it. So we're going to be doing drop down x squared. We drop. I'm going to write it over here. So we drop down x squared. We drop down positive 3. And then we're breaking down the middle term. So we're rewriting the middle term as those two factors. Order doesn't matter. So I'm going to just go with minus 1x. These are x's, right, everybody? So minus 1x minus 3x, and then we factor by grouping at this point. So now we'll factor out the greatest thing in common here is an x. So then divide by x, divide by x. So left would be x minus 1, right? Are we pretty good with feeling pretty good with factoring overall? And then over here in common is a 3, but we've got to pull out negative 3 because there's a negative in front. So we're factoring out negative 3, so we'll divide each term by negative 3. So then left is x minus 1. Now look, safe haven's the same, so we can factor out x minus 1. So then it divides out, and left is x minus 3. Now we factored it, and now we can set each of those equal to 0. So we have x minus 1 equals 0, we have x minus 3 equals 0, and then we'll solve for x in each case. So we add 1. So we get x is equal to 1, check, and then we would add 3. So we get x is equal to 3 and check. So everybody see how to do that. So today, what we're going to be given is we're going to actually go backwards through this, and it's actually a little bit more simple than this, but we're going to be given the roots, and they're going to ask us, they're going to say, these are the solutions, so what was the quadratic? So what we're going to do is we're just going to work backwards through this and go backwards on these steps, and we'll end up back up here. This would have been the quadratic that gave us those solutions. It's actually not as bad as it sounds. So everybody, this next example is already written out for you. If you watch up here, though, hopefully it will make more sense than just looking at that. So it says, when given the zeros of a quadratic, we're asked to find what is the quadratic. So the first thing we would say is, okay, what are the solutions? You see how it's crossing at 2 and 4? No, it's crossing at 2 and 6, right? Isn't it crossing at 2 and 6? So we'd say, okay, x is equal to 2 and x is equal to 6. Does everybody understand that part? Now, if we're working backwards, remember the last thing we did was we had linear factors that were set equal to 0. Notice this is not equal to 0. So we're going to fix this to be equal to 0. So we're going to make this side 0 using algebra. So what did we subtract 2? Now we have to do that to both sides of the equation. So over here on this side, we're going to have an x minus 2 equals 0. Does everybody see how I rewrote that? Now think about why that makes sense. If I was going to solve, wouldn't I add 2 and get x equals 2? Does everybody see how I just went backwards? So over here we would say, okay, we need the linear factors equal to 0, so we would subtract 6 from both sides. So that's x minus 6 on this side, and then we get equals 0. Does everybody understand that? If x minus 6 was our linear factor, then x equals 6 was our solution. Now remember, before we split them apart, before they were split apart, they used to be multiplied together. So we used to have x minus 2 times x minus 6, and they were equal to 0 there. Remember at this point when we split them up, instead of each equal to 0, we're pulling them back together. And now we know how to multiply a binomial and a binomial. Remember, you've got to double distribute. So everybody watch so that you remember how to do this correctly. X times x is x squared. Now we've got to multiply x to negative 6. So x times negative 6 is negative 6x. Remember not to draw in your arrows and then do it. That defeats the purpose of drawing in your arrows. You draw in your arrows to help you know what you've done and haven't done. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So now I've got to multiply negative 2 through to both terms. So I'm doing negative 2 times x, which is negative 2x. And then negative 2 times negative 6. Be very careful with your signs. That's positive 12. And now we'll just combine like terms. So we have x squared negative 6x minus 2 more x's is minus 8x. And then we have plus 12. So this was the quadratic that gave us those two solutions. Does everybody see how we just went backwards? That's literally all we're learning today. Nothing more. So it's pretty easy. As long as you don't make minor. So we're just going to do example 1. I'm just going to do like a couple more with you, and then I'm just going to let you practice, and we'll get it done in class and not have homework. If we all can just get what I asked you to get done. So it says identify the zeros and write the polynomial in standard form. So we want to know what's the equation of this quadratic. So if we know the zeros, then we can go backwards and find the quadratic. So we're going to write out x equals negative 4 and x equals negative 2. So go ahead and write that. X equals negative 4 and x equals negative 2. Oh, I gave you the answer, I think, on accident. That's okay, because it's the purpose of going through yours won't have the answer there. But that's okay, we'll keep going through this. So before they were equal to negative 4 and negative 2, we had linear factors that were equal to 0. We've got to use algebra to bring that negative 4 over, so we're going to add 4 to both sides. So on this side, we have an x plus 4. And now on this side, we have a 0. Awesome. It's a linear factor. Over here, we've got to add 2 so that it's 0. So we're going to have an x plus 2 equals 0. Any questions? Before they were split apart and each side equal to 0, they used to be multiplied together. So it used to be x plus 4 times x plus 2. Before they were like that, before they were factored, they were all multiplied together. So we're going to distribute and combine like terms, and we're going to do it correctly. X times x is x squared. X times positive 2 is positive 2x's. Positive 4 times x is positive 4x's. Positive 4 times positive 2, be careful not to add them, it's multiplication. That's positive 8. And then from there, we're combining like terms. So we have an x squared plus 6x, and then plus 8. Now, we better look at and notice that is what that told us it was going to be. So I'll just do 2 quick more examples, and then literally the rest of the time will be yours to practice. So just stay with me. For these last 2, they'll go pretty quick. So now it's just asking the same thing, but differently. It says, given these zeros, find the quadratic in standard form. Okay, so we're given zeros. Doesn't that mean we're close to the x-axis, guys? Right? So it's the same thing. So if we want to know, okay, this is the solution, this is the solution, let's work backwards and get the linear factor. So on this piece, we're going to add 5. So that would be x plus 5 equals 0. Over here, we're going to subtract 5. So we'll have x minus 5 equals 0. Before they were split apart, they used to be multiplied together. And now we'll double distribute. X times x is x squared. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. 5 times x is positive 5x. Careful on this one. Positive 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. Our last step is to combine like terms. We have x squared. Notice those happen to cancel off. Negative 5x plus 5x is 0 x's, so we won't write it, and then minus 25. So there is the quadratic in standard form that gave us those solutions. We just went backwards. Last one, and then we will be done with the example. So it says, given the zeros, x is equal to negative 2 and x equals 0, find the quadratic in standard form. So we will first get it set equal to 0, so I've got to add 2 on this piece. So we have x plus 2 equals 0. Now x equals 0 is just x equals 0, correct? It's already equal to 0. Before they were split apart, they used to be multiplied. So we're going to have x plus 2, and then we have our x and equal to 0. We're both multiplied together equal to 0. So now the nice thing is this one's a really easy distribution because we just got to take x and multiply it in, right? X times x is x squared. X times positive 2 is positive 2x, and we're done. This was the quadratic that gave us those solutions, right? If we went backwards, we'd factor out an x. Left would be x plus 2, and then we'd set each of them equal to 0. Everybody see that? Pretty simple, as long as you're being really careful, not making sign errors and multiplying and whatnot. Okay, so do the practice problems. There's a couple there with pictures. Notice on the last example, it's going to be decimal, so leave that one for very last, and we'll go through it together. So I want you to practice the others, though. So on that last example, for your practice, our solutions are x is equal to negative 3.5, correct? Look at where it's crossing the x-axis. Isn't it crossing at negative 3.5, roughly? That's where I wanted it to cross. And then it's crossing at x is equal to, be very careful, because it's not crossing at negative 1.5, which a lot of people say. It's only up to negative 0.5. Does everybody see that? So negative 0.5. Now, to do this, we do not accept decimals. So what you're going to want to do is use your graphing calculator to give you the fractions of those. So take your calculator. You'll go like this. You'll go to, I need this. Okay. So we're going to figure out what negative 3.5 is as a fraction. So you'll type in negative 3.5. Now you have to hit enter, and it's just going to give you the answer negative 3.5, but you're just putting it into your calculator. Now you'll hit the math key, and then see how it says let's turn that into a fraction. So you're going to hit math, and then hit enter, enter. So it's negative 7/2. So then we'll do negative 0.5 if we don't know what that is as a fraction. Hit enter. And then you'll hit the math key, and then fraction. So negative 7/2 and negative 1/2. That's what we're going to write as. So instead, we're going to write negative 7/2, and x is equal to negative 1/2. Does everybody understand up to there? So then from there, it's a little bit trickier. There's just one extra step. You wouldn't just add a half. That would be not incorrect, because a lot of us will want to add 7/2. But what we're really going to want to do instead is say, okay, technically this is negative 7 divided by 2. What undoes division? Multiplication, correct? So let's undo this too by multiplying both sides of the equation by 2. So we get 2x on this side is equal to, now look, 2 over 2 becomes 1. And now we just have negative 7. So I multiplied both sides by 2 to undo what was on bottom of the fraction. Does everybody see that? So now my last step, because we want it equal to 0, would be to add 7. Add 7. So we have 2x plus 7 equals 0. Now look, if I was going to solve algebraically for x, wouldn't I subtract 7 divided by 2? You see how we get negative 7/2? Okay. So we have that. Now let's do this side. Once again, you wouldn't add a half. If you ever have a fraction, undo what's on bottom. So undoing division is multiplication. So we'll multiply both sides by 2. So over here I get 2x, and that's equal to 2 over 2 becomes a 1. So we're good. Those divided out to be 1, and we still have negative 1. So now to get it equal to 0, we would add 1. So we have 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now, do you guys see how that works? Because if you were going to solve for x, wouldn't we subtract 1 divided by 2? Negative a half. Does that make sense? So now we'll put those together and multiply them out. So we have 2x plus 7 times 2x plus 1. Now let's distribute that correctly. Two x times 2x is 4x squared. Don't mess that up. 2x times positive 1 is positive 2x. Positive 7 times 2x is positive 14x. Positive 7 times positive 1 is plus 7. And from there, we'll combine like terms. 4x squared plus 16x's and then plus 7. Fractions, you'll always rewrite as decimals, you'll always rewrite as a fraction and then go through that process. So it's not really a whole lot different.